Hello, everyone. Good evening. This is Amy McMorrow Hunter from the Climate Economy Education, Inc., and we're here for our solar owners, cooperative owners for solar meeting. And tonight we have Paul McKnight from EFS Solar. Is that right? And he's going to talk to
Energy.
EFS
Close
Energy.
enough.
And sorry. And he's going to talk to us about who's subsidizing whom. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Paul. Thank you.
All right, thanks for hosting. And yeah, I think this is the last in our series here. So I think we put together a good little series of videos here that we'll be sharing with anyone who's interested. So yeah, my topic tonight is who's subsidizing whom. And I call it unraveling the straw man, because this is one of the co-op's favorite kind of go-to talking points whenever we get into any kind of a discussion or argument about solar, and whether or not there should be more or less solar on their grids, and the reasons behind it. So who's subsidizing whom comes from their argument that they like to say non-solar customers are subsidizing solar customers. And this is their reasoning behind that statement. They say that solar customers are not paying their fair share of the cost to maintain the electric grid, and the co-ops therefore then have to raise rates to compensate for their lost revenue. Therefore, all customers are bearing the cost. So they like to use this talking point to tell people that they're paying for the other guy's solar. And they say this hurts low-income member owners the most because they're often on fixed incomes, and a majority of the co-ops are comprised of this class of member owner. They say most of our members are 60 plus, and they're on fixed incomes, and raising rates hurts them. So this is one of their primary talking points. And so I just want to go in here kind of point by point and give our counter arguments to these statements, which I'm calling a straw man because I do believe that's what it is. Their explanation for these statements. So when questioned about the fees that are charged for interconnection, these are the fixed costs that you pay every month just to be connected to the grid, in relation to the actual cost to maintain the grid. The co-op advocate that we recently heard from in a recent debate replied that the interconnection fee, which is typically somewhere between $20 to $40, does not fully cover the cost of their maintenance to the lines. Part of that maintenance cost, part of their base operating costs, are covered by the kilowatt hour charges on the bill, and that their decision to make the interconnection fee lower than their actual cost to maintain the grid is a social decision that's designed to reduce the total cost of low-income members who maybe don't use as much power, as much kilowatt hours. All right, and it sounds legit on its face, right? But however, that means that the kilowatt hour rate has to be higher for those folks in order to make up the difference, right? If they charge less than what it takes to pay for their base costs, then they have to raise the cost of the kilowatt hours in order to make that up. So it's still, the person is still paying the same amount that they would need to pay in order for the co-op to make enough money to operate, right? Logically. And then later in the same debate, the same person, said that, well, of course, commercial customers get a lower cost per kilowatt hour because they're buying it in bulk, and they should get it at a discount because they're buying in bulk. You don't pay the same price for one banana at the gas station as you do for a box of bananas at Sam's Club. And I wrote paraphrased in there because those weren't his exact words. That was my interpretation of what he said. I don't remember exactly what his example was, but it was something to that effect. So normally, and so these statements, when you isolate them and look at them in a bubble, they make sense, right? Oh, they're buying in bulk, they should get a discount. Oh, but then you're also saying, well, retail, or the individual homeowners, well, they have to pay more because they're buying less. oh, but we're also giving them a discount on their connection fee because we don't want them to have to pay as much. So all these statements are conflicting with each other, right? And then to further on that point, I'm saying, have you ever heard your co-op complain that customers with uninsulated houses or customers with electric heaters are subsidizing those with insulation and propane heat sources? Because they're certainly not paying for the same amount of electricity, or throughout the winter or in the summer. And in fact, all of these scenarios, whether you're using more power or less power because of the amount of insulation you have in your house, or whether or not you have LED lighting, or whether or not you have electric or gas heat, they're all handled in the same way. The total cost to operate that utility grid is distributed among all the ratepayers, except for the fact that people with solar, they're not just using less power, they're also sending their excess power back at certain times of day, which allows that utility to buy and sell that power at a profit when full new retail net metering is limited or not offered at all. So a lot of times, as you probably know, they'll buy the power for maybe avoided cost at maybe 3 cents and resell it to your neighbor for 10 or 12 cents. So they're still able to benefit from that excess power that's being sent back. And we'll talk more about that value later. I put profit in quotes because as a reminder, co-ops by design are nonprofit entities. And so they're not actually making profit, but excess revenue that they do take in must be distributed somewhere, right? So it's either investments or salaries or other expenses that they'll claim. So continuing on this kind of counterpoint, I would say that it could certainly be argued that the cost to upgrade a utility grid to the latest in clean energy technology, or any technology for that matter, which is what people want, when you're talking about smart grids and the ability to get power back on in the case of an outage, and investing in clean energy. Generally, when people are polled, the majority of people do want that. Should be handled in the same way that every other time it's happened. Examples: new coal plant, new nuclear plant, new natural gas plant, new hydro plant, new wind farm, new smart meter technology. Anytime the utility decides to implement one of these new construction projects or new technology, that cost is spread out to all paying members. And that's just how it works. Everybody basically agrees. So to our point, to my point, when somebody adds solar, that improves the grid, and we think of that as simply building a small portion of a new power plant. Utility companies should love that because the member owner just spent their own money on that improvement without being forced to through rate hikes, which is phenomenal. This doesn't happen with a new coal plant. You don't get people volunteering and coming and writing checks out of their own back pockets to finance that coal plant just out of the kindness of their hearts. And by that logic, you could say that member owner just subsidized the rest of the grid by spending their own money to add infrastructure to the utility grid, which completely flips that argument on its head. The possible solution, if you believe that the co-op is going to become insolvent or needs to raise everybody's rates due to less than 5% of its members buying solar panels, one possible solution is to raise the interconnection fee or that monthly unavoidable cost to actually cover the cost of maintaining the grid, and reduce the kilowatt hour fees to whatever their cost is, which one of the Cooperative Spoon River actually did, and they've reported that most people's average bill was actually lower after having raised their fixed costs and lowering the kilowatt hour costs. Now, doing this would reduce the value of energy efficiency measures and solar energy that's used behind the meter, but it does allow the utility to be, basically agnostic about the energy efficiency or solar that's coming onto their grid, because they're gonna cover their fixed costs with the fixed charges that they charge every month. So this is a possible solution that has been implemented. Spoon River Electric Cooperative being the most local example that we have doing that. And from what I understand, they're happy to talk about it and share, what they're doing with others. I personally, I'm not a huge fan of this, because by reducing the kilowatt hour fees down to bare minimum, that does kind of diminish the value of solar that you could be sending back to the grid. In that situation, I would argue that solar energy is still worth more than whatever their otherwise avoided cost is, because it's distributed generation. And if you look at any value of solar studies, there's good explanations about why that value is higher. Things like transmission losses and things like that. Another possible solution is to assign a value to solar energy, the value of solar that's being sent back to the grid, that's actually representative of the value that it brings. And like I just mentioned, most studies show that this value is much closer to retail than the utility company wants to admit, and may even be higher than retail in some areas. And that's all dependent on the draw on the local substations and what types of loads are on those substations and what type of generation capacity exists in those areas. So ideally, every utility would do a value of solar study with a third-party company that is able to identify a fair value for the solar, not just switch on or off to, it's either net metering retail or it's nothing, it's avoided cost. There's a big gap in between there. And even if that value were slightly less than full retail, it could still be significantly higher than the avoided cost of dirty energy, of coal or nuclear or gas energy, while still benefiting the utility by allowing them to buy and sell that electricity between neighbors at a profit, and allows the solar member to still get a decent return on their investment. And I think that most people would agree, and I think that the members should be polled potentially to to ask their opinion here. But the utilities should encourage the member owners to invest in their infrastructure, and not discourage it. An even better solution: virtual power plants. So this is actually a proven solution here, where everybody benefits. By the utility companies in some areas, in some states, are actually doing this now. They're incentivizing the customers, are paying them a cash rebate to purchase solar plus storage for their house or for their business, in exchange for the utility to be able to use some of that stored energy during peak usage times. This allows for the member, the customer, to retain some stored energy for power outages at their own home. It allows them to produce their own energy and save money on their electric bill. And it also, at the same time, gives the utility company an extra generation resource that they can call on during peak usage times. And this solves a lot of the arguments that the utilities have against it. And the biggest hurdle here is just implementing the technology, the smart meters, bidirectional things, the upgrades to the substations. So this is entirely possible. It's happening and should be talked about. This should be coming up a lot more towards the top of the list than it currently is. This is not exactly a brand new concept, but it's only, I think, recently really become possible to do this efficiently. And in my opinion, this is the way to go. This is likely the best possible scenario for most utility grids, and I would imagine kind of the future of where things are going, which is why we should be talking about it and not just stopping the conversation at solar panels is somebody making money and somebody else losing money. This is more, you know, we need to look at it in a comprehensive way, looking at the entire utility grid, taking into consideration the long-term planning goals of that utility and of that, what's in the best interest of the members of that co-op. So that's the end of my presentation here. And this is just kind of an add-on thing, just kind of like thoughts that I had as I was writing it. Questions to kind of ask yourself: will the co-op actually lose so much money from members going solar that they need to drastically raise rates and hurt low-income families? Isn't investing in distributed solar and smart grid technology good for everybody? Many co-op boards make investment, rate change, and salary decisions with little input from the member owners, had their own pockets. And I'm not going to say that that's universal across the board. That's not definitely true of all co-ops, but with some that has happened. They are nonprofit organizations, which you are member owners of, and you have the right to know how and where they spend their money and what they do with excess revenue. Something to ask and look into. And then just kind of looking at the reason why would they make this argument, right? That we can take apart and we can go, look, here are the facts. We've kind of taken the straw man apart here. This is kind of a false argument, but why are you making this argument? Well, most utilities prefer to own all of the generation, right, in their grid, or they're locked into long-term purchase from a generator somewhere else, and they're just distributing the power, but they might be locked into a 15-year contract where they have to pay for that power, and so they don't want you to disrupt that model by owning your own generation facilities. There is anti-solar propaganda that it gets distributed widely throughout the cooperative networks, not just cooperatives, but most of the utilities. And so they'll spread this anti-solar propaganda and say it's dangerous, don't do it, you know, it's expensive, it's a scam. Then you'll see a commercial on TV where they're saying, hey, look at us, we're investing in renewables and we've got, you know, we're building our own solar fields. And because solar is becoming cheaper than all other sources of energy, and they know that, they've done they look at the financial models, they understand that solar is going to be a cheaper generation resource for them over the next 25 years. And so they are investing in it on their own. But they don't want you to invest in it. They don't want you to own it because that takes away from their control of it. So it's just kind of like looking at the reasons why these arguments are being made, and in addition to taking them apart and asking these questions to dispel these myths, these rumors. Because when you look at those arguments without asking these questions, you can go along with it and you can say, oh, well, you know, the poor co-op, they're going to lose their money if we don't, you know, stop people from doing solar. That's my presentation.